Welcome to Deep Dives, where we dive beneath the surface of news to better provide historic and situational context, as well as assess challenges and opportunities that may arise. This is all approached from different political perspectives, each with historical context. Please enjoy this internet radio podcast while you continue with other tasks. Now, on to the podcast.
Hey everyone, welcome back. We're diving deep today into Eastern Europe, specifically the situation in Ukraine. We've got kind of a mix of sources for this one, reports from the ground, some political analysis, and even a little bit of historical data. It's not just going to be, catch you up on the headlines. We really want to unpack how we got here, what's happening now in early 2025, and what it all means for the future.
Yeah, it's a complex situation for sure. While I'm sure many people remember the 2022 invasion, the conflict really isn't frozen in time. There have been these periods of, fragile ceasefire, but tension in the region is very palpable. There are over 1 million people still displaced from their homes.
Over 1 million people. It's hard to even grasp. I can't imagine having to leave everything behind and not knowing if you could ever go back.
It's a humanitarian crisis, really, of immense proportions. And organizations like Médecins Sans Frontières and the International Red Cross, they're working constantly to address both the physical and the mental health needs of those affected. And their reports highlight the rise in PTSD cases, the limited access to counseling, and just the monumental challenge of rebuilding basic services in areas that have been war-torn.
So we've got this ongoing human tragedy, but there's also this whole diplomatic chess game happening kind of in the background, right?
Absolutely. The Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, the OSCE, they've been working to facilitate talks between Russia and Ukraine. And it's important to keep in mind that the OSCE's role is often to keep communication lines open even when finding a solution seems impossible. So these dialogues, they're crucial, but the continued sporadic fighting, it really underscores just how fragile the situation is.
And then there's the economic pressure that's being applied through these sanctions. I'm sure a lot of you listening are following the debate within the EU about whether or not these sanctions are actually effective, or if they might even backfire, especially regarding Europe's reliance on Russian energy.
Yeah, that's a key point. You see this debate, it reflects a broader concern within Europe, which is this fear of economic consequences if this conflict drags on. The European Council on Foreign Relations found that a full 55% of Europeans are already worried about the economic fallout from these sanctions.
Wow. So we've got these economic anxieties within Europe, but it's not just a European issue, is it?
Not at all. This tension has really kind of sent ripples throughout the whole region. Countries like Poland and the Baltic states, who are acutely aware of their proximity to the conflict zone, they're bolstering their defenses. And even further afield, nations in Central Asia and the Caucasus, they're reevaluating their alliances. They're trying to navigate this new geopolitical landscape.
It's like this conflict has become a catalyst for a much broader shift in global power dynamics.
That's a good observation. And it kind of brings us to another interesting aspect of this conflict. It's a really clear illustration of how warfare is evolving in the 21st century. It's not just about tanks and troops on the ground anymore.
Right. We're talking about cyber attacks. We're talking about economic warfare. We're talking about this battle for public opinion, this information warfare. These are the tools of modern conflict, and understanding them is crucial for anyone who wants to really stay informed in today's world.
Precisely. But maybe let's shift our focus now to Ukraine itself. One key development has been Ukraine's pursuit of closer ties with the West, particularly its bid to join the EU. This isn't a new aspiration, but the conflict has definitely accelerated it.
And from what I understand, public sentiment within Ukraine leans heavily towards this European alignment. Why is that? What's driving this desire?
Well, that's a complex question with deep historical roots. For generations, Ukraine has been pulled between East and West, both geographically and culturally. And this conflict has, in many ways, forced Ukraine to make a choice.
So Ukraine is looking towards the West, while Russia views this NATO and EU expansion as a direct threat to them. This fundamental disagreement seems to be at the heart of this conflict.
It's definitely a core issue. You see Russia, they see the West kind of encroaching on what they consider to be their sphere of influence, while Ukraine, they're seeking the security and stability that they believe will come with closer ties to Europe. It's a clash of perspectives, really. It's a geopolitical tug of war with incredibly high stakes.
Yeah. We've talked about the challenges, the diplomatic complexities, and the very real human cost of this conflict. But amidst all of this, are there any glimmers of hope?
Well, there are always glimmers of hope. What's really inspiring is the resilience of the Ukrainian people. They're not just surviving, they're actively working towards a better future. We're seeing local volunteers, NGOs, and international charities really stepping up in incredible ways, not just providing aid, but rebuilding communities, fostering dialogue, and creating these spaces for healing.
It's like they're defying the despair. They're choosing to rebuild even while this conflict is raging around them.
Exactly. And there are these remarkable grassroots reconciliation programs emerging, particularly in communities near the conflict zones. Think about it. People who've experienced the trauma of war firsthand are choosing to reach across divides, to engage in dialogue, and to seek common ground.
That's powerful. That gives me hope that even in the darkest of times, the human spirit can find a way to light the path forward. But let's be realistic. This conflict is deeply intertwined with these various political viewpoints, each with its own perspective on the causes, the potential solutions, and what should happen next.
You're absolutely right. And understanding those different perspectives is critical. Our sources actually delve into how various groups, liberals, progressives, independents, right-wing factions, and even the Christian right, view the conflict and its potential resolutions. Each brings a unique lens to the table, shaped by their own ideologies and values.
So that raises a crucial question. How do these perspectives, informed by historical context and current events, influence potential outcomes and future actions? That's something we're going to have to explore further. But first, I think it's important to take a closer look at the long-term outlook for this conflict.
I agree. We can't just focus on the present. We need to consider the potential trajectories, the possible scenarios that could unfold in coming months and years. And that's where our historical data from institutions like RAND and the European Council on Foreign Relations comes in.
They've analyzed past conflicts, they've identified patterns and potential pitfalls. One key takeaway that resonated with me was this concept of negotiation fatigue, the idea that as these conflicts drag on, the willingness to find a resolution can wane on all sides.
That's a critical insight, especially when you consider the economic concerns we discussed earlier. If a significant portion of the European population is already anxious about the impact of sanctions, how long will their governments be willing to maintain that pressure?
It's a balancing act, supporting Ukraine, holding Russia accountable, but also safeguarding their own citizens' economic well-being. I imagine this dilemma plays into the various political viewpoints we were just talking about.
Absolutely. How those concerns about economic fallout might shape future actions by liberals, conservatives, and everyone in between, that's a key question. Do they prioritize peace at any cost? Or stand firm on their principles even if it means prolonging the conflict?
And what about the independents, the ones who often favor a more pragmatic approach? Are they questioning the effectiveness of sanctions, demanding clear metrics for success, wondering if there's an exit strategy?
These are the questions that thoughtful observers are asking. And let's not forget the Christian right perspective. They often emphasize the moral dimensions of the conflict and the humanitarian crisis unfolding in the region.
Right. They might be calling for increased aid to refugees and displaced persons, but also condemning Russia's actions as a violation of their values. It's a reminder that this conflict isn't just about geopolitics and economics. It's about people's lives, their beliefs, and their deeply held values.
Exactly. And those human elements often get lost in the noise of international diplomacy and political maneuvering. But before we go any further down that road, I think we need to circle back to something we touched on earlier.
You mean the stories of resilience, compassion, and hope that are emerging from within Ukraine itself?
Precisely. Amidst all the turmoil and uncertainty, there are these incredible examples of the human spirit shining through. We'll delve into those stories when we return.
Welcome back, everyone. Before the break, we were talking about, the more difficult side of this conflict, but I'm feeling like we need some optimism here. It's important to balance out all the heavy geopolitical talk with those inspiring stories that are coming out of the region.
Yeah, I agree. Focusing solely on the negative can be pretty overwhelming. It's crucial to remember that even amidst all this conflict, there are incredible displays of, resilience, compassion, and hope.
You're right. I think we've been focusing a lot on that macro level, the international relations, the political debates. But at the end of the day, this conflict is about people, real people whose lives have been completely turned upside down.
And that's exactly why these stories of resilience are so important. They remind us that even when things are at their darkest, the human spirit can shine through. They give us a glimpse of the potential for healing and rebuilding, even as the conflict continues.
So tell me more about these inspiring stories. What are you seeing in the source material?
Well, one thing that really stands out is the work being done by all these local volunteers, the NGOs, and the international charities. They're not just, providing that emergency aid, the food, the shelter, medical care. They're also working to rebuild communities, foster dialogue, and create these spaces for healing.
Earlier we were talking about that concept of negotiation fatigue
Yeah.
on the international level. But it seems like on the ground, they're rejecting that fatigue. They're actively choosing to work towards a better future.
Exactly. They're demonstrating that even in the face of, these immense challenges, there's this really profound human need to connect, to build those bridges, and to try to find that common ground. And that's where these grassroots reconciliation programs come into play.
Right, right. We touched on these briefly before the break. These are programs that are specifically designed to bring people together across the divides that this conflict has created.
And they're not just theoretical exercises happenings in some conference room. These programs are happening out there on the ground in communities that have been directly impacted by the fighting. They're bringing together people who may have seen each other as enemies, just a short time ago.
I can only imagine that takes incredible courage and a willingness to look beyond all that pain and anger. It's a testament to the power of the human spirit to choose hope over hatred, to choose forgiveness over resentment.
Yeah, and it speaks to a deep-seated longing for peace, a peace that's not just, the absence of war, but a peace that's built on understanding, empathy, and a real shared vision for the future.
So we've got these inspiring stories of resilience, but we also have to acknowledge that this conflict is, it's continuing. And the longer it goes on, the more questions it raises about those long-term implications.
You're raising an important point. How might this conflict, how might the outcome of it shape global power dynamics in the years to come? Will it reshape alliances? Will it redraw borders? Will it redefine the rules of engagement on the international stage?
Those are big questions that analysts and policymakers are grappling with right now. And the answers are, well, they're far from clear. But one thing is certain, the ripple effects of this conflict are being felt way beyond Eastern Europe.
Yeah, we've seen the impact on energy markets, on defense budgets, on political discourse, really, in countries around the world. And as this conflict continues, those ripples, those are likely to spread even further.
It's a stark reminder that, we live in this interconnected world. What happens in one corner of the globe can have, profound consequences for the entire international community. And it underscores the need for informed and engaged citizens who can understand the complexities of these global challenges and contribute to finding solutions.
Yeah, it also highlights the importance of critical thinking, being able to really sift through all that information overload to be able to discern fact from fiction and form those really well-informed opinions. We can't just passively consume the news. We need to actively engage with it.
I think that's a key takeaway for our listeners today. This conflict is complex. There are no easy answers, and anyone who claims to have a simple solution is either misinformed or deliberately misleading you.
That's a really good point. This isn't a situation that you can neatly categorize into, good guys and bad guys. There are multiple perspectives here, each with their own valid points and legitimate concerns.
Right. And understanding those different perspectives is so crucial if we want to make any sense of this conflict and its potential implications.
And it's not enough to just be aware of those different viewpoints. We also have to be willing to actually engage with them, in a thoughtful and respectful way, to listen to what others have to say, even if we don't necessarily agree with them, to try to find that common ground, even when it seems kind of elusive.
I think that's a key challenge for all of us in today's world.
Yeah.
We're so quick to kind of retreat to our own echo chambers, surround ourselves with people who already share our views. But that kind of intellectual isolation, it doesn't serve anyone, least of all ourselves.
It's only by stepping outside of our comfort zones, by really engaging with those different perspectives, that we can truly grow and learn. And that's true for understanding this conflict as much as it is for, any other aspect of our lives, really.
I couldn't agree more. So as we wrap up this part of our deep dive, I want to encourage all of you listening to continue exploring this topic. Don't just accept what you hear at face value. Dig deeper. Seek out those diverse perspectives. Challenge your own assumptions.
Because ultimately, understanding this conflict, it isn't just about acquiring knowledge, It's about actually engaging with the world around us, with all of its complexities and contradictions. It's about developing your nuanced understanding of, the forces that really shape our lives.
Beautifully said. And on that note, we're going to take a short break to gather our thoughts. When we come back, we'll explore some additional layers of this really multifaceted conflict and leave you with some final thoughts to ponder.
Welcome back, everyone. As we wrap up our deep dive into this Eastern European conflict, I kind of want to shift gears for a moment. We've spent a lot of time talking about the big picture, the geopolitics, the diplomacy, the various political viewpoints. But, I think it's really crucial that we bring it all back down to the human level.
Yeah, I agree. It can be easy to get caught up in the abstract, when we're talking about a conflict of this magnitude. But at the end of the day, it's individuals. It's communities, it's families. They're the ones who are most deeply affected. Their stories are the ones that really bring the human cost of this conflict into focus.
Right. And those stories are often the ones that get lost in the noise, the international headlines, the political debates. Exactly. That's why I think it's so important to highlight the voices of those who are living through this every single day. The people who've been forced from their homes, who've lost loved ones, the ones who are struggling to rebuild their lives with all this uncertainty hanging over them.
And it's not just about acknowledging their suffering either, right? It's about recognizing their strength, their resilience, their determination to create a better future for themselves and their families.
Absolutely. The stories of resilience coming out of Ukraine are incredibly powerful. They really remind us that even when faced with such adversity, the human spirit, it can endure. And that even in the darkest times, there's always hope.
So as we bring this deep dive to a close, I want to leave our listeners with a few key takeaways. First and foremost, this conflict is, it's incredibly complex. There are no easy answers. And anyone who claims to have a simple solution, they're either misinformed or they're deliberately misleading you.
Yeah, that's a really important point. This isn't a situation that can be neatly categorized into good guys and bad guys. There are multiple perspectives here, each with its own, valid points and legitimate concerns.
Right. And understanding those perspectives, it's crucial if we want to even try to make sense of this whole thing, of this conflict and all of its potential implications.
And it's not enough to just be aware of those different viewpoints either. We need to be willing to engage with them, in a thoughtful and respectful manner, to really listen to what others have to say, even when we don't agree with them, to try to find common ground, even when it seems, almost impossible to find.
I think that's a real key challenge for everyone in the world today. We're just so quick to retreat into our own little echo chambers, right? Surround ourselves with people who already agree with us. But that intellectual isolation, it doesn't do anyone any good, least of all ourselves.
Yeah, it's only by stepping outside of those comfort zones, by engaging with different perspectives, that we can really grow and learn. And that's true for understanding this conflict just as much as it is for any other part of our lives, really. I
couldn't agree more. So as we wrap up here, I wanted to leave our listeners with a final thought to kind of ponder, This conflict, with its blend of conventional warfare, cyber attacks, the economic pressure, this battle for public opinion, it's a really stark illustration of how warfare itself is changing in the 21st century. What does that mean, I guess, for the future?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And I don't think anyone has a definitive answer right now, but it is something that we all need to be thinking about, because the way that we answer that question, it's going to have huge implications for the future of international relations, for peace and security, and really, I think, for the future of humanity itself.
That's a pretty heavy thought to leave us on, but I think it's an appropriate one. This conflict, it's a stark reminder that we live in a very complex and interconnected world, and that the choices that we make today, both individually and collectively, they're going to shape the world that we all inherit tomorrow.
Yeah, so let's all try to make those choices wisely. Let's choose to engage with that complexity, to embrace the nuances, and to really seek understanding, even when it's difficult. Because in a world that seems to be more divided every day, those are the qualities that I think will ultimately lead us to a more peaceful and a more just future.
Well said. And on that note, I want to thank all of you, our listeners, for joining us on this deep dive into the Eastern European conflict. We hope you found it informative and thought-provoking and maybe even a little bit inspiring. Until next time, stay curious, stay engaged, and stay hopeful.
Deepdives.org hopes you found this conversation to be informative, enlightening, and most importantly, thought-provoking. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and follow us on streaming and social media platforms where available. Looking for unbiased news that considers all political perspectives? Check out our Simply News podcast for this news story on Facebook, YouTube, and other podcast platforms. Until next time, stay informed and be engaged.